Hello, everyone. Salam, durud, namaste, shalom, whatever greetings you need, please welcome yourself to this space. We're really excited to speak with you today about police and our Arab, Muslim, and Middle Eastern communities. As we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Obaid to talk us through our agenda for today.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to start off with an introduction to our organization, I-AMM, and then move into a land acknowledgements and ground ourselves into our space and where we are. After that, we will find our panelists and introduce them and have them start the panel for today. After we've had a discussion, we're going to break off into smaller groups and then come back together as a larger group and discuss what we've learned from kind of processing and breaking down certain topics that we wanted to discuss with you guys. After we kind of reconvened, we'll have another grounding to help us process everything from today, and then we'll discuss some next steps that we take after our experiences today.
So before we begin, I want to talk more about who are the AM. This moniker AM, Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, does not fully encompass everyone who identifies with our community. When we speak to the AM community, we aim to be as inclusive as possible and to provide a net for anyone who needs a place to land. We define who we're looking at by looking at three different identity vectors: race and ethnicity, religion, and region. You may have been more familiar with acronyms such as MENA or SWANA, but essentially referring to anyone with a experience in the Islamicate world. The Islamicate world being all the regions that are where Muslims have been culturally dominant, but maybe not specifically with the religion of Islam. So Muslim, Armenian, South Asian, Iranian, Arab, Pashtun, Nubian, Balochi, Berber, Egyptian, a white Muslim convert, Turkish, any of these ethnicities and more. And you find yourself belonging in this description, we're speaking to you. On the vector of religion, if you're atheist, agnostic, searching, non-practicing, unmos, mos, Sufi, Druze, Christian, Jewish, anything from the Islamicate world, and you find yourself belonging in this description, we are speaking to you. In region, if your ancestry is from a Muslim majority or Muslim minority country, the Islamicate world, like Pakistan, India, Egypt, Malaysia, Indonesia, Nigeria, Sudan, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, the Gulf, Uyghur, China, parts of India, and you find yourself belonging in this description, we are speaking to you. To learn a little bit more about I-AMM, our mission, our vision, and what this organization is all about, I want to pass it over to Dana.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. Our mission is to bring together the many AM folks in this country who are working tirelessly to clean up white supremacy from within our communities and collectively heal the wounds of becoming and being a fractured people in the US. The reason I was drawn to I-AMM and the reason this work is so important to me is I've always been really passionate about engaging in anti-racist work, but a big takeaway I took from doing the Undoing Racism workshop here in Austin was that in order to engage in anti-racism work, you have to get really clear on who you are. And that was really hard for me because right now I find myself in a place where legally I'm considered white, but culturally and socially I'm not always, I can't always fit into that box. And so I find myself in this position where I'm often made invisible in a world where I don't have political power as an Arab, but at the same time, I'm finding myself balancing being marginalized and benefiting from privilege, and also not having other people with similar identities to engage in this work with me. And so finding I-AMM has been a really powerful way to find a collective identity where we actually can push forward an anti-racist agenda. So, you know, in this place where I feel like my identity is constantly decided by whoever I'm around, and I never feel like I fit in fully and unapologetically into any identity marker, I'm tired. We are tired. We are tired of assimilating and being erased in the name of becoming model minorities. We are tired of being used by whiteness as a weapon against our other brown and Black siblings. We aim for the recognition of our communities, united as a socio-political bloc, to uplift each other's voices and leverage our solidarity. We remain grounded in our rich, care-centered cultures in the context of our situational Americanness. So our vision is that our power as Arabs, Muslims, and Middle Easterners, we can create socio-political change only if we build solidarity in our cultural identity marker, and with that, hopefully, a political collective identity. So with this like bonded collectiveness, we can more effectively collaborate as a people with other Black and brown leaders and white allies towards collective liberation in the US.
Okay, so I'm going to do the land acknowledgement. When I was asked to do the land acknowledgement, the first thought that popped into my mind was that I was gonna write something. It was gonna be beautiful. I was gonna throw my expertise into it. It'd be a little bit poetic. And then as I started to write, I realized that I shouldn't write it. That it was inappropriate for me to write it because it was already written. And the thing that kept popping into my mind was the Ulali song, "All My Relations." I believe it was produced in either right around 1997 or 1998. And the reason it's not my place to make it is because there is a Native American band. There are 3 musicians who have already done this. And as a non-Native American, it's not my place to do this. I would be reproducing, I would be co-opting, I would be stealing, in effect. I would be erasing their identity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the lyrics to the Ulala song, "All My Relations," as the land acknowledgement. To our elders who teach us of our creation and of our past so that we may preserve it for ancestors yet to come. This is dedicated to our relatives before us thousands of years ago, and to the 150 million who were exterminated across the Western Hemisphere in the first 400 years' time, starting in 1492. To those who have kept their homelands, and to the nations extinct due to mass slaughter, slavery, deportation, and disease unknown to them, and to the ones who are subjected to the same treatment today, to those who survived the relocations, and those who died along the way, to those who carry on traditions and live among their people, to those who left their communities by force or by choice, and through generations no longer know who they are, to those who search and never find, to those who turn away the so-called non-accepted, to those who bring us together, and to those living outside, keeping in touch, the voice for many, to those that make it back to live and fight the struggles of their people, to those that give up, and to those who do not care, and to those who abuse themselves and others, and those who never revive again, to those who are physically, mentally, or spiritually incapable by accident or by birth, to those who seek strength in our spirituality and way of life, to those who exploit it, even our own, to those who fall for the lies and join the dividing lines that keep us fighting amongst each other, to the outsiders who step in, good or bad, and those of us who don't know better, to the leaders and prisoners of war, politics, crime, race, and religion, innocent or guilty, to the young, the old, the living, and the dead, to our brothers and sisters in all living things across Mother Earth and her beauty we've destroyed and denied the honor that the Creator has given each individual, the truth that lies in our hearts, all my relations. All right, I'm going to hand off the grounding to Obaid.
Okay. Thank you for that beautiful recital of land acknowledgement, Dr. Suganda. So what I want to do now is, we might be feeling a little anxious, we might be feeling a little out of place. I want us to center ourselves and ground ourselves into where we are in this present place and time. Dr. Hosgranda beautifully grounded us into the space that we live on, the ground that we are on. Let's see if we can find our own space within ourselves as well. So in previous groundings that I have been a part of or have led, we have done this thing where over Zoom, we would turn off our cameras so we can focus more on our presence here instead of maybe what we might look like or might be appearing, what expressions we might be making during the grounding. So right now I would invite everyone who's participating in the grounding to turn off the webcams. And then we can begin with a grounding exercise. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want us to start with a quick breathing exercise. Get yourself relaxed and comfortable position. Make sure that when you breathe, you're not feeling any pain or any tightness. If you do, adjust yourself as you need to. Again, when I speak, it's more to guide you. If it's not, if you're not connecting with it, or if you feel I'm not connecting with it, go ahead and focus back into your breathing and bring yourself back to your body instead of your words to help you really get a good experience out of this exercise. So let's breathe in, take deep breaths, and we're gonna do counts of 4. So breathe in, hold your breath, and exhale. One more time, inhale, hold it, and exhale. Keep your eyes closed and focus on your breathing. Can you feel your hair touching your head? Can you feel your belly rising and falling as you breathe? Can you feel the space between your eyes? Can you feel the distance between your ears? Can you feel your breath touching the back of your throat as you inhale? Can you feel your arms touching your body? Can you feel the bottoms of your feet? Do you notice the space within your mouth, the way your tongue rests against your teeth? Can you feel the temperature of the air around you, the breezes against your cheek or your hand? Can you feel how one arm might be heavier than the other? A tingling or numbness in one over the other? How one might be more relaxed than the other? Do you notice where the tightness is? Do you notice where the lightness is? Do you notice your body hanging onto your bones? Do you feel yourself settling into your seat? Can you feel your hair touching your head? Inhale. Hold it. And exhale. Inhale. and exhale. Okay, I invite you to turn on your webcams if you wish. Thank you, everyone. I hope that this brought some peace. And I'll pass it off to Dr. Banafsheh. Thank you.
So I'm going to introduce the folks that you've been hearing from so far. We are the I-AMM team. I'm Banafsheh Madaninejad. Y'all lift your hands when I say your name. I'm Banafsheh Madaninejad. I am a recovering professor of philosophy, left academia in 2019 to start this organization, where I focused on critical race theory, specifically the racialization of Muslims and feminist philosophy. We have Pierce Stoneburner, who's our audio engineer, tireless, amazing audio engineer. He is also our website guru. We have Dr. Roy Casagranda, who is our podcast co-host. We have Dr. Mona Mirjani, who will be joining us shortly. She is a scientist and also a social worker, and she is our Healing Circle facilitator. We have Ramesh Nadeem, who is the, there he is the person who wears a lot of hats in this organization. Our production engineer, production director, he's also a podcast co-host. We have Dana Haddad, the curatorial director and archivist, and Dr. Aved Zia, our social media director and in-house pharmacist. Okay. I personally feel so extremely lucky to be surrounded by these folks. And I thank them and the forces of the universe every day for their presence. Okay, let's go to the panel. I just wanted to step back a little bit and tell you all about why we decided to go with a town hall Zoom meeting about policing in our communities. Reason one, of course, is that because of the ongoing, the most recent and ongoing BLM uprisings. But reason two is because of a controversial event that took place in mid-June at the East Plano Islamic Center, right here in Texas, close to Dallas. And this event went viral, and we connected with two of the organizers of the event, the organizers who were protesting the event. And what happened was basically that this mosque, this Islamic Center, announced that a panel entitled, and this is the name of the panel, Systematic Racism and Open Discussion About Policing Policies with Plano Police Chief. They announced that this would be presented as a response to their, they wanted to do something for the uprising. And so instead of inviting a BLM leader, a Black Muslim leader, or an academic with expertise to be their sort of speaker, expertise in this area, they invited the police chief. And the Plano police chief is Black, and this is, of course, an added sort of layer to the whole complicated issue. So Muslim Americans from across the country, especially the two organizers that I was telling you about who are now on the panel today, Sabina Ibraheem and Sara Bawany, quickly called on the mosque, on the Islamic Center, to cancel the virtual talk, saying that the event amplified police narratives at the expense of Black organizers working to end racialized police violence. The event was not canceled, although some changes were made, and I'm hoping that our sisters here can expand on that. So again, I want to thank our panelists, and I want to introduce them to you now. I want to thank them for being here and being a part of this important conversation. our first panelist is Dr. Amilcar Shabazz. He is a professor of history and Africana studies in the W.E. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. His book, Advancing Democracy, African Americans and the Struggle for Access and Equity in Higher Education in Texas, yes, he is from Texas, was the winner of the T.R. Fehrenbach Book Award. The 40 Acres documents, a volume he co-edited, was one of the earliest scholarly works in the modern movement for reparations for slavery. There is much more I can say about Dr. Shabazz, but y'all, you should go look him up. Next, we have our sister Sabina Ibraheem. She has a master's in elementary education, is a Pakistani immigrant mother of 3. She is a longtime activist, a member of ICNA, and a participant in Why Islam events such as Dawah booth and seminars. In June 2020, the video, this is the epic situation that I was just telling y'all about, the video of Sabina's masterful and heartfelt critique of the Islamic Center's lecture entitled Systematic Racism, but delivered by the Plano police chief, became an overnight sensation on social media. And I want to say that I-AMM actually had a hand in making it go viral. Sara Bawany is our third speaker. She is a clinical social worker, an award-winning published poet, a writer, and a freelance editor. She works at Facing Abuse in Community Environments in Dallas, or FACE, an organization that aims to hold religious and community leaders accountable for abuse in the Muslim community. She recently won Daybreak Press Publishing's Best Poetry Book Award. Her work has been featured on TEDx, the Muslim Youth Musings Literary Magazine, Voyage Dallas Magazine, and Brown Girl Magazine. Next, we have Dr. Maryam Kashani. She's a filmmaker and an assistant professor in gender and women's studies and Asian American studies affiliated faculty at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she focuses on racial, ethnic, religious diasporas and transnational political movements, gender and sexuality, Islam and Muslim communities. And last but definitely not least, my former colleague, Dr. Phil Hopkins. He is a professor of philosophy at Southwestern University, where he teaches and writes about the phenomenology of identity, particularly racialized identities and critical race theory, and on the specifically on whiteness, and on the intersections of identity and ethics in contemporary media and consumer culture. Before becoming an academic, he worked for several years as both a police officer and a social worker. So Sabina and Sara, I wanted to start with a question for y'all about EPIC, and what was your take about the event when y'all did the pushback? What was the response of the East Plano Islamic Center? Were you happy with that response? And what has happened since?
So I'll go first. We had a chat, we have a group chat, and as soon as I saw the post that this event, there is an event titled this, and then there is a Plano police, I kind of like freaked out, and I immediately said, can I talk to somebody in regards to this? And you know, back and forth people said, and I said, I want that to be stopped. So I did voice my concern right there, but I didn't go all the way. And I said, I would like this event to be stopped. And then from that point, I tried calling anybody who I knew in the admin. I got hold of a few prominent people, and they kind of like supported me. And, you know, they were very good with listening to my concern. And they said, okay, why don't you talk to the board? And they are very open and understanding. And so I was trying to, and I was trying several ways to get in touch with one or any board member. So in the meantime, I talked to one of the panelists, and I tried to convince that panelist that why there is a problem with that, and try to give her facts and everything, that panelist some facts. And that same evening, I was able to get one of my, the other people who I talked to, arrange a meeting, phone meeting with 2 of the board members. So I got on phone with them, and I again explained everything. They were very respectful in listening. They were patient. They heard everything, and they reflected back that they understood everything well. And they said, okay. And of course, I told the same reasons why there's going to be a problem and what could be the repercussions and how could it affect our solidarity with the Black community. And they said that they will take it, they will discuss among themselves and they will decide. Although I want to add one thing, that I told them that when you consult other people, which they said, I said, please make sure you consult not one, but two people from the Black community before you make your final decision. So they said, yeah, I mean, we are going to think and talk and decide.
You mean the final decision of whether or not to actually hold this event?
Yeah, whether to air it or not.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was, I think, the day before. And then the next day it did happen, but before that they brought in one of the downtown Dallas's prominent figure to kind of justify the reason why they were doing it.
And this is a Black imam, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. So he did that, and after I watched, I said, okay. I mean, they made a point, so it's good.
What was his response? Like, what did he share?
Basically, the gist was that the problem is not the police, according to him. It is the white supremacy, and not something on that line. And Sara, correct me if I'm wrong. But he pretty much laid the ground for the upcoming event, kind of like with his blessings, that, you know, there is nothing wrong with addressing and talking to the police. There is the bigger issue is white supremacy and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's the first part of the question. And the second part is, after the event happened, of course, there was a lot of opposition, protest before the event took place on Facebook, and even after also. And one thing I did notice was that, from my perspective, that APIC has held quite a few programs on addressing racial issues, racism, and all those related topics. So there was a program for the youth, there was another program for youth girls, and then one of the panelists has started a book club. She has been doing book club, but the book she chose after that is on a topic of racism. And she has brought in speakers, and I had the opportunity to watch one speaker. She is a UNT professor, and she did a marvelous job of laying down the history of racism and how it's connected with Christianity, and how Christianity found its roots through Christianity, and then it started into anti-Semitism and the other hatreds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sara, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So my mom is very involved in EPIC's outreach committee and has been involved with EPIC for the last several years up until now. I used to be, and I'm not as much, I'm not really at all now. So I didn't have the positive experience she had, although I acknowledge that it did happen. And I'm really glad that at bare minimum, they were willing to listen to her, because I know with many other leadership organizations, like, they will very easily shut people down who have any kind of opposition. And my mom is kind of known to, stand up and speak up when she doesn't like something. However, like, it doesn't, and it shouldn't justify the fact that a really troublesome and problematic event happened, right? And it's not for me to bash on the masjid or bash on the institution as a whole, but when hundreds and hundreds of people are speaking up and saying that this is not okay, we're not okay with this, this is like, read the room, this is really the wrong time for something like this. To go against it and then find one person who happens to agree with you, who happens to be Black, to justify the event is so tone deaf and so indicative of these issues within the Muslim community, is that we still don't get it. We still don't get it. Like, the world is falling apart. There are uprisings everywhere. People are dying. People are being shot, and we still don't get it. And that's just, at the end of the day, that's all it is. And so, quite honestly, despite the fact that they were willing to listen immediately and, were hearing my mom's concerns, it was extremely disappointing to see that not only did they go through with the event, but it seemed to be pre-recorded. They said it was live, and it wasn't live. They turned off the comments on YouTube, etc., in some effort to silence people who were still continuing to speak out about the event. The petition that our coalition launched, I believe, obtained 800 or 900 signatures in like 12 hours around the country, which was kind of a huge deal. Of course, I think if it had been up for longer, it would have garnered more, because so many people around the country voice their discomfort for something like this. And of course, I haven't been keeping up with like what they've done to rectify it, but to my knowledge, there was never really a public apology. The only thing they did was they brought in the former Imam of Masjid al-Islam, I believe his name is Imam Khalid, who's a very well-respected person in the community, but also has a very different position than most of the Black community. And Masjid al-Islam, once they heard his position and saying that, no, it's fine to collaborate with the police, were, from what I heard, very upset. And they said, this is not our official position. I don't know why he's saying that. And so no disrespect to him, he is entitled to his own opinion, and it's not our job to tell him about his experiences. But when my mom said consult with 2 Black Muslims, she meant 2 Black Muslims with differing opinions too, not just the one that happens to agree with the ethic board. And of course, like the statement itself that the problem is not police, the problem is white supremacy, is very contradictory to me, because the police itself is rooted and was created out of a white supremacist institution. So it's all connected and it's all one and the same. And I think people really need to do a better job, and especially the Muslim community, of digging back to our roots. Yeah, so all around it was extremely disappointing. And I've seen that they've continued to hold different discussions and book clubs and whatnot. But it's unfortunate to say, I think the people who were hosting the panel have not proven to be, by the larger community, have not proven to be experts on the subject of race or police brutality. So I don't necessarily see how continuing to hold discussions and talks on race is any more helpful if the wider community, at least from to my knowledge, does not seem to trust their expertise.
Absolutely. So if EPIC came to you and said, we want to do it differently, what would you suggest? And also, what do y'all, if you could give me a sentence about what was wrong with the event, what would that sentence be?
Are seeing backlash from people around the country and choose not to listen. And I mean, and you know, one could say that it was like the younger generation who was primarily upset, but there were a lot of people from the older generations that were also upset. And I think just a little bit of what I've heard about the culture at EPIC right now is that young people there don't have a voice the way they used to. And so they're further silenced, especially when they're leading something like this. But again, it wasn't just us. Like my mom was one of the most prominent people at the forefront, and they listened to her, but it was surface level, and there was nothing that was done.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to say like one sentence about the event itself, it was, you know, it was titled Systemic Racism, and I think that's what it was, Systemic Racism in the Community. And
the title was, let me tell you what the title was. Systemic Racism and Open Discussion About Policing Policies with Plano Police Chief.
Yeah, Systemic Racism and Open Discussion. And it was like kind of right in the heat of all the rallies and the protests and everything.
The uprising.
Yeah, the uprisings that were happening around the country. And first of all, like the event itself, there was really no mention about systemic racism. It was really just, you know, policing policies that really have nothing to do with these larger police precincts that had not only a week before, like half an hour downtown in Dallas, had arrested several people, tear gassed several people. And, you know, kind of like thanking them like, well, we're thankful this hasn't happened to us. And it's like, you're thanking them for not being animals? Like, I don't understand. Or thanking them for their time in the military, but also like asking them questions. And I mean, everything about it, that everything we heard that was meant to justify it just kind of ended up being the opposite. And unfortunately, it just wasn't, like, even if we tried to give the event a chance, like, it just wasn't helpful. It really did feel like a political stunt. And like my mom said, like, they had every opportunity to try and stop it, to listen to the people in the community, to ask more than one person who agreed with them about, you know, is this event okay? And they just chose not to.
Yeah.
And,
so I'm just gonna jump into the first question, and I want to start with the two of you. And the first question is, abolish the police is not a monolithic movement. All see the phrase as a call to completely rethink the very concept of law enforcement in this country, but the organizers don't seem to agree on the details. One thing is clear, and that is that the invitation is to go beyond what is realistic. This is a call for a wrought and branch transfer, a root and branch transformation. So with all that in mind, what exactly does abolish the police mean to you? What do you deem is more preferable to a pragmatic reformist agenda, if that is your position? Who would you say, what would you say to folks who see this position as a politically toxic framework, you know, that will boost Trump or undercut the BLM movement?
You want to go, Sara? Okay. I'm going to speak from my perspective, where I kind of like what I'm hearing on the ground and with my community and my friends and people who I speak to. So, or even the community leaders also. So when we talk about, or the topic of revamping police or abolishing police comes, the biggest fear that comes to mind and over again is so the thought is that, oh my gosh, they are talking about lawlessness, which means there'll be no one to call if there is a burglary, or no one to call if there's something wrong. So this is the biggest fear, I think, among at least people I talk to, that, so that means that we'll have no police, means no one to take care of criminals and no one to take care of crimes. So I think that is also one of the biggest inhibiting factor into leaping into this whole conversation. They want to shy away from it because they are not sure what this whole thing means.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to that, I would say, yeah, I know, like, abolition and abolishing the police, like you said, looks very different according to the different communities you come from. And I think one thing, especially from the Muslim community's perspective, that it's really important and critical to understand is that like, if we make it about the Muslim community for a second, because they keep unfortunately wanting to center themselves in this issue when it's not really just about them as a whole. The police, you know, the police force and law enforcement in this country has never actually been friends with the Muslim community. It's all very surface level. It's all really quite a facade. If you look at CVE and if you look at the informant programs that happened after 9/11, and the FBI still infiltrating and still showing up at the houses of prominent Muslim community leaders and members to this day, this facade that the police have been friends with us is a joke. It's just not real.
Sara, a literacy moment, going back to what you said about CB. Can you open that up and talk about that a little bit? Not too much, just.
I don't know all the details, and I don't want to like say anything wrong. So I don't know if someone else can elaborate on it, but I would have to go back and research it. I know about the existence of it. I know a little bit, but I don't think I can speak much to it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
And then also, like, to people who say that abolishing the police is a really radical idea or that it doesn't exist, it's just because people in this country for a very long time have never seen what it's like to live without like this heavy police presence, or people in this country don't quite understand the heavy policing that goes on in Black and Brown communities in the lesser funded areas of the city. So they don't actually quite understand and seem to get how heavily people are policed for no real reason, how heavily things are criminalized for no real reason, like nonviolent crimes. And if we just look at examples around the world of places where the police don't have as much of a presence, like you can think of Sweden, where they've almost virtually like nearly abolished the police, and they have a very different model for what policing looks like. Scotland has a violence reduction unit. Switzerland has an alternative sentencing approach, and Finland has a housing first strategy. And so it's like there's so many models around the world of what less policing looks like and what it looks like to invest more in your community, so that crime, or whatever people in this country call crime, is not as prevalent as it could be. And we know that crime comes from underfunding communities and underfunding of resources and education. And it's not a radical thing to want to abolish the police. It's actually something that would, with reinvesting the funds into proper community resources, would really make our economy and our people in our country thrive. But because we are so interested in increasing the wage gap and in letting specific people have power and in squashing the power of others, it's deemed as a radical idea, but it's not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sara. Phil, Dr. Shabazz, where are y'all on this issue of abolition versus police reform?
That you can't tinker around the edges or try to just sort of reform policing as it's structured in this country because of its history, but because of its more fundamental sort of systemic purpose, which is to maintain order and to primarily maintain order by segregating, right, communities from each other and identifying certain communities as suspicious and dangerous and policing and monitoring those communities in order to protect, as Dr. Kashani was saying, the privileges and the well-being of other communities. So when people say, what are we going to do when we abolish the police? Like, what's it going to look like? I always just say, well, just go into any affluent white neighborhood near you and you'll see what it looks like not to have sort of policing. You'll see what it looks like for communities to sort of exist without a constant police presence policing them, right? Unless they get really out of line. And so, you know, those communities are not full of smarter people. They're not full of more moral people. They're full of people that have well-being and economic sort of support. And so, as several people were already saying, I think the push to defund police is the push to reinvest in the more systemic and structural issues that create the problems we think need policing in the contemporary world, and which we try to address with a system of policing that is still stuck in a past.
Thank you, Phil. Dr. Shabazz.
Thank you. Yes, I definitely don't see the call for defund and the different actions going on in this moment as having a pro-Trump effect. And I think that kind of reaction is something merely to sort of, I don't know, silence the push for deeper thinking, more radical thinking, more, as has been said, trying to really drill down to the root of the problem. I've been in conflict with the police and the communities I've lived in for most all of my life. And I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, and the police were part of defending a Jim Crow order. I was born 60 years ago, and they were part of defending a Jim Crow order, American-style apartheid. And, you know, even when bills were passed and efforts were made and they start hiring Black people in places they would never hire, and we start electing Black people to different offices, one thing that never really ever came up, there was never a reckoning about, it was the police. And how does the police need to change if society now recognizes people of African descent as full human beings invested with the full rights of American citizenship, or full human rights as human beings? If that's the case now, how does this armed police force that used to jail us and shoot us and beat us for trying to demand our human rights, how must it now change? And just to say, well, to hire some Black people to the police force, no, you had Black people under the Jim Crow police force. They couldn't arrest white people, but they were on the Jim Crow police force, and they would have different specific assignments in the Black community, in certain areas of the Black community, basically to surveil, and then to let white people know if something was going on, to then go in and arrest and crack heads. So to hire more Black people in an already racist and already command and control structure that's designed to maintain an unequal and inequitable status quo, again, where's the rethinking of the police? And so I didn't see it in the 70s. Didn't see it in the 80s. I didn't see it in the 90s. We get into the new millennium. I'm looking for it. Then you elect Barack Obama and everybody says, but I'm like, that's still more of the same. That's still just putting a black face in a space where it had only been white people. And now we think that's changed things. No, if the structure is still anti-black, if the thinking of the people hired in these jobs, their anti-blackness is still never questioned, then to me, I don't see where change is happening. I don't know where do we get to a new place with policing. So yes, now I'm fully with defund. I've put in the chat room information and link to the Breathe Act. These are, of course, measures that are still, to me, they're not revolution. They're not revolutionary measures, understand that. But they are measures that within the law and order and peaceful framework of America, if we can move toward these, they enable us to try to exhaust all possibilities within this democratic framework to have a more humane, a more human-centered and just society. I don't know that it'll come this way, but I think we've got to try all of those measures, all of those avenues. So look at the Breathe Act, look at what it's saying, and yes, this is definitely, I wholeheartedly endorse this new direction that I see people are raising. Even here in my little place where I live now in Amherst, Massachusetts, where we put our police chief on the spot of some of these things, and he talked about how none of his officers have drawn a gun in 42 years. Well, that wasn't, we had to call him on, it wasn't quite true. We had a little uproar of some of our students in 2014, and they pulled pepper spray guns and fired pepper projectiles, 500 rounds more than our UMass police department. So we had to catch them a little bit. But then again, the police here, no, there's not been any big overarching problems. The chief, I get along with the chief. I've met with him many times. He's, posed with me in front of a Black Lives Matter banner and then says he endorses, it doesn't want that kind of thing to happen here that we've seen all over the country. But again, it's not about the individuals. It's not about more different kind of training. It's about fundamentally, how do we move away from this crime and punishment, this kind of model of society that grew up and grew out of the genocide of Native indigenous people, the enslavement of Black people, and all the other aspects of oppression that have been ingrained. It's, to me, this is the evolution toward a truly human rights centered society that we need to take that step.
Thank you, Dr. Shabazz, and everyone else. I'm going to move on to the second and third questions. So many AM folks are intimately familiar with life in a repressive police state, where police, the military, extrajudicial forces regularly terrorize folks through imprisonment, kangaroo courts, disappearing folks, murdering them. I can go on. My experience has been that it's hard for some of us to think of the US as a police state. And it's easy for us to think of, wow, this is a breeze compared to what we've experienced. So what would you say, first, so this is the first part of the question, what would you say about them saying the US is not a police state? And then how do you all think about law enforcement in general within the US and US military and imperialist escapades and presence in the Islamic world? Again, Islamic world, when we use the literacy moment, Islamic world basically means that area of the world that it has a predominantly Muslim culture. It doesn't mean that they're all Muslims. Yeah, so how do you make that connection? And also, what would you say to folks who say, life is a breeze here, this is not a police state?
So I will jump in. So I have to explain to my viewers, for those of them who don't know, when we come from Pakistani or Middle Eastern culture, we are not coming from a truly Islamic that doesn't mean it's a truly Islamic culture. So we have seen, or we grew up seeing a lot of corruption, especially, and no respect for policing, at least from my background, where I'm coming from. People did not respect. They were easily bought. Like, you know, you could buy and get out of trouble, but just by bribing and everything, most of them. And so when we come here and we see this law and order, we have all of a sudden, we have a lot of awe and respect for our police and our law enforcement, because number one, they are not corrupt. They cannot be bought. They cannot be bribed on the surface. And they are very respectful. And even when they're giving you a ticket, they are very respectful. So from my perspective, I would say that yes, you know what, they're nice to me. They are very respectful. They don't catch me for that it's something that I'm not doing. So why should I have any problem with the policing? But what I'm learning, and that's really opening my eyes, is that there is a parallel world, but invisible world next to my world, that is very fully functional and very fully in place, full force in place. And that world has a lot of oppression committed by these same law enforcement agency towards the public, the human beings, which are Black, African American. So that gave me a totally different view of my police. And now when I see a police, I say, you're one of them. But before, it was like, oh my gosh, I was filled with awe and respect for them. So I think majority of people in my generation have this hard time understanding that where we are coming from, we are bringing a lot of history behind, or the experiences that we are bringing. But when we see and most of them, keep in mind, we live in suburbs. We live in generally economically affluent, not affluent, but upper middle class neighborhood. So as Dr. Shabazz just said, that if you want to see what it looks like, go to a neighborhood. And that to me was, oh, so what we see in ours is how it should be. But for majority of us, we think this is the way it is across the United States. And the second thing I would feel is that many people who don't understand this, they feel that by having a narrative against the police, we are being a traitor. We are not being loyal to this new country that has given us home and has given us the opportunity to flourish and excel in whatever we put our minds to. So I think that's where the perspective of my generation of immigrant Muslims come from. And I'm speaking from people that I know, and I'm representing myself.
Thank you, Sabina.
I can speak a little bit personally too about this as well. As a young person, I did plenty of things where I could have encountered the police in ways that would have made my life turn out really differently. But because of the body I embody, I knew that I was treated very differently. And I'd been stopped by the police in my car with friends, and knowing that encounter could have turned out quite differently, I recognize how those privileges that I experience in terms of what Sister Sabina was talking about are directly related to how other bodies are policed in our society, right? And I think for folks who haven't experienced the kind of brutality that we see a lot now in the media, that we've been seeing for centuries, I think it's our responsibility to recognize that our own sort of perceived sense of law and order, our own perceived sense of safety and security is really on the backs of other populations, right? Predominantly Black and brown populations that are heavily policed, right? And I think it's also important to recognize that there is a certain image that the especially Muslim immigrant population, the South Asian, Arab populations are predominantly middle and upper middle class or wealthy, and that's actually just not true too as well. They're especially in the Bay Area, in New York, and in other places around the country, there are
immigrant populations that are also feeling this level of policing, this level of suspicion in terms of their own everyday lives as well. So I think it's also important to recognize that the narrative is really broad. And also through my work with Believers Bailout, we've seen that this general impression of the police not being bad, right, and being here for our safety and security often backfires. When people will call the cops for some domestic reason, they actually start to learn and experience how the police will treat them, and how the police will often bring violence, often bring incarceration into their scenario in ways that they didn't expect, because they haven't had to deal with them on a daily basis. So I think this has been really important for our work too, to actually educate the Muslim communities we work with on what their rights are in regards to dealing with the police and like the FBI and things along those lines, right? To not automatically trust that they have your best interests at heart. And so this has been really important as well. Yeah, thank you, Maryam. Thank you, Sabina. Because of time, I'm just wondering if Phil and Sara have something short to add to that, and we'll wrap it up with insights. Hopefully, maybe something to say about imperialism and a connection between the two.
Sure. Sure. So something I think people aren't paying, there's a lot that has been said that's really important and worth amplifying, but in the interest of time, I'll just bring up something that I think people aren't paying a lot of attention to, and that is the way in which, over the past 2 decades in particular, police forces have actively recruited veterans. And I think there's a really important question to ask about what is foundational about the way we look at policing that we think a soldier would be good for that job, but that's a separate question. I think what's worth pointing out is that those veterans, at least for the past couple of decades, have often been in arenas in which those who are marked as Muslim or presumed to be Muslim are identified as the enemy. And then they bring that perspective back with them into these police departments. And there were 2 studies by the Islamophobia Studies Journal. I think one was in 2011 and one was like in 2014. And in those studies, the majority of police officers, not just the veterans, but the majority of police officers had negative perceptions about those who were marked with emblems of Muslim identity, right? And considered them to be dangerous and a threat.
I'll quickly add as well,
Yeah.
like a lot of the Muslims, in addition to what Dr. Phil was saying, is like the way we change that is by inviting them and showing them that we're not that bad, and just like having tea with them, and like that doesn't work. And we've historically seen that doesn't work, just because of the fact that our communities are still heavily policed, even though we may not know it. And just going back to the original question of why we would say the US is becoming a police state. So all it means to be a police state is it's a government that exercises power through the control and power of the police force, and also having laws in place that allow the government to infiltrate, private conversations, our technology, et cetera. And we know that George W. Bush passed that law, that they have been monitoring what we do, and especially Muslim communities are primarily targeted in those laws. And in general, like if you see like the history of police militarization in America, this really started specifically in like after the 1967 riots in Detroit, and with the beginning of the war on drugs. And so it allowed police to have access to military grade weapons. And then you also look at the 1033 program, which allowed law enforcement agencies to get their hands on military hardware. And you've seen between 1997 and 2014, a $5 billion in material was transferred from the Department of Defense to local law enforcement. And I'm reading some stuff because I don't want to get my numbers wrong, but like you just see that the police budgets have increased significantly over time. And that's why we say the police need to be defunded, is primarily those military grade weapons are weapons they don't need and they're using to hurt our communities.
Thank you. I think Dr. Shabazz, before you go, Maryam wanted to just add one thing. Go ahead, Maryam. Yeah, and I think Sarah was about sort of speaking to this. I think it's also important to remember, even if we're thinking that this doesn't look like a police state, if we actually look at how much as a country we spend on policing and on the sort of entire carceral system, you can say that we actually are a carceral society, right? That the amount of money that goes to police, to courts, to prisons, to jails, right? Things like $182 billion a year. And it's probably much more than that at this point. If we think about how much we spend on the military, right? We are a military state, we are a police state, and just in terms of where we put our like priorities financially, right? Just in Chicago, where I live, you know, the city closed a number of elementary schools a few years ago under Rahm Emanuel. The level of protest to that is nothing compared to the level of protesting or the level of like angst about defunding the police, right? Like the fact that we can question the closing of schools and hospitals and get really nervous about defunding the police even just by half, right, speaks to the level of carcerality in our society.
Thank you, Maryam. Dr. Shabazz.
Yeah, it's all very much linked, and you have to look at the police state that does exist here from those who are most directly living it, and be very, very, very honest about it. I'm thinking back to when I was an undergrad in Austin, and I never really did any of the UT sports or football or anything like that, but I had a cousin 1 year younger. He had started at Oklahoma, and Oklahoma and UT were meeting in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. And he said, let's get together. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. And I said, okay. So I said, I have to figure out how I'm gonna get there. Well, my neighbors, I lived in Riverside Apartments, and I had, there were 2 young white women who were apartment mates right across their door, right across from ours. They were both from Dallas. And they said, hey, we're going home that weekend for the bowl. Why don't you, ride with us? You then hook up with your cousin, ride back with us when the weekend is over. I said, cool. We'll get out there to Dallas. Well, some things happened on my cousin's in Oklahoma. He ended up not making it to Dallas. So here I am kind of stuck with my 2 friends from the apartment. And they were very, very congenial. One of them, the more working class one, whose parents were school teachers, she said, you stay with us. We got a room for you. The other one was a very affluent girl from a part of Dallas called Highland Park. And so her dad was having Debbie over, and of course that meant me too. And so we're over at their house in Highland Park. I don't think they'd ever had anybody black there except people to work there. They had a black butler. The black butler's looking at me strange, from as soon as I walk in, thought it was a guess who's coming to dinner kind of situation. So he's like, oh, is he with Debbie? Is he with the other girl? And I'm like, I'm not, brother, I had to calm him down. I'm not with either of them. It's okay. But anyway, all of this to say, when we left there to kind of just go out to dancing in a little club, whatever it was, Cotton Eye Joe, they were going to teach me the Cotton Eye Joe. We're driving out, and beautiful Highland Park suburb, all of that. The police are there. They're just not there like they are in the hood, but they are there. So boom, they pull out behind Debbie and my other friend. And I'm sitting in the back seat. No tail light out, no, Sandra Bland, went in the wrong lane without a signal, driving perfectly, but they stopped the car. What do you think the problem was? So they come, the officer, a couple of white guys, hand on the gun and everything. They put their head in and they, are you girls all right? Are you girls all right? And looking back in the back at me. And so Debbie got indignant and said, what did you stop us for, officer? What did you stop us for? Oh, it's because of our friend, and it's our friend, huh? No. And I'm like, calm down, Debbie. We don't need to have all of this protest right here, right now, please. I'm kind of trying to signal that to her. But so obviously I wasn't killed, but I did fear for my life. I did fear for my life in Highland Park, but we got out of there. They were all upset after that, and by the way, when I met the lawyer, the daughter who lived in Highland Park, the young woman, her father was an attorney. And he was laughing. He was happy to meet me. I guess once he knew I wasn't dating his daughter or something, but he was so happy to meet me. He was telling me, you know, I want to thank you. Your people are who've made me rich. How I'm out here in Highland Park, rich as I am, is representing you your black people in all kind of, you know, crime, in the criminal justice system. So I looked at all of those interconnections from that really weird weekend. And I'll tell you, it's just been part of, I said before, this police thing has been in my life, my whole life. And it's whether I'm in the suburbs, whether I'm in East Austin in the hood, my political education, I'm at UT. In '79, 2 plainclothes white officers killed a man named Grill Couch, just chokehold him at a barbecue pit. You know, thought he was out of hand and just did what they did to George Floyd to him. We protested, we raised hell, we did all of this. They said, well, maybe a reform, we ought to think about chokeholds. Nothing happened. Nothing happened to the officers. Nothing happened to, you know, Grill Couch dead. So it's been on and on. So for me, you know, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, I'm just like, how long is this gonna go on? What does it take to stop this police state that's killing us? And that's why for me, this is the moment. And we need the allyship, we need the comradeship, we need everybody in on this. If you are not having any problems with police, like I said, right now, where I am, I'm in no problem. Little tiny college town of Amherst. But you know what? I still know that police state is out there. It's out there and it's deadly. And we all have skin in the game. So that's my piece on that.
Thank you all. If nobody else has anything to say, I think this portion, the panel is over. All right, so we would love to hear whatever y'all feel comfortable sharing about what was coming up for you in the breakout sessions. What was sort of what was the conversation focused on? What were some questions that were coming up? What were some emotions that were coming up? And we're hoping that somebody has already volunteered from within each of the breakout sessions to share that. But if you forgot to do that, I forget a lot, especially these days, just, you know, somebody just go. We're willing to suspend the one diva, one mic. Just even talk over each other. It's cool.
I'll go. I was voluntold. I knew that was going to happen. Go for it.
Oh. All right. Hi, everybody. So in our breakout session, we started off with a conversation with it was with Insha and Abaid and Sabiha. And we started by talking about, well, Insha was talking about her activism with Kashmir, and she has family in Kashmir, and thinking about, you know, this question about if you're coming from a space where that's heavily policed and militarized, how does that connect to your relationship with police here? And what was interesting is that she was describing that she had a sort of less threatened view of the police in the US as compared to her family, who kind of automatically saw the police as threatening. And I thought, and what that brought up was this broader question about, well, because I actually have opposite experience, because my family, my grandfather was the chief of police in Andhra Pradesh and in India. And I think that what we're seeing here, and I think also connecting back to Sabina's point about this diversity view of law and order in the Muslim community, is that I think some of the tensions and the differing views of law and order in the sort of colonized lands have kind of migrated to the US, right? So I think as a result, in our Muslim or AM communities, we have people coming with very differing views of law and order because of their differing experiences. Whereas on the one hand, you have, you know, Pakistanis and Indians who are might be very pro-military and pro-police. On the other hand, you have Pakistanis and Indians and Kashmiris and others who have been sort of the subject to over-policing. And so they're all in the same community. And then even within the Muslim community, you have, you know, people that are going to open the doors to the police, and then you have people that have been, you know, detained. So it's going to be really difficult to arrive at some sort of general consensus around this issue. And one other point that Insha raised, but you know, she raised this question, which I think is really important, and is how do we continue this conversation about oppressions happening in other parts of the world, like Kashmir, Palestine, and Yemen, without necessarily taking away from the BLM movement? And that was sort of like a big question that we left with. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, this is Roy. I was voluntold to be the speaker of my group. So, but like we talked about, like how, like Roy made a good point, how it feels like being on a what is it, the merry-go-round, where it's like, you know, things are getting better, but oh, they stayed the same, and they didn't really, nothing really shifted, kind of, sort of, and being in the kind of that constant cycle of where we think, you know, okay, we have this chance to, you know, the defund movement is right now, but will it continue on after, say, something like a Joe Biden win? And we kind of liken that to the full global, like, imperialistic nature of the United States, where it's like, you know, not only policing here in our country, but policing the world. And having people say, you know, hey, you know, we want to stand up against, you know, Democrats and Republicans, you know what I mean? Even though under a Democratic president, will these people go, well, a lot of the people that are active now go back to sleep, or will they continue in the fight? And then we also kind of talked about, I asked the question, you know, as a Black man to, you know, Muslim folks, Arab and Muslims, how do y'all face discrimination with policing? And it's like, usually it's like, y'all face it more with travel. You know, when you pull out your passports and they see your name, you know, even though you may pass as, Roy said he passes as white or Mexican, but when he pulls out his passport, they see his name and he gets a little more looks, or, you know, a little more tension or pressure because of that. And then Usman said that growing up, you know, when he came to the country, his name was a major thing. He would get to use first name and stuff like that. So it was a really interesting discussion.
Thank you, Roy.
I'll jump in. Our group definitely, we picked up on a lot of these themes. Donna, Vivian, and Beverly, and myself. You know, our takeaways. I think you know, we were all very struck by sort of the question of how, again, different people perceive and make sense of policing, given their sort of you know, backgrounds and different sort of regimes, imperial, colonial, otherwise, that they come out of. Yeah, well, one point that was raised was that, you know, there's work that needs to be done on this front, you know, to get over this sort of what one of the sisters called the awe of the police, that they're doing such a good job. And how do you sort of work the question of systemic discrimination, police violence, police racial discrimination into that narrative? It's very hard to penetrate that sometimes when people do come from backgrounds where police violations are seen as, you know, kind of informal, or police violating their own codes of conduct. So how do you find another way of framing police violence and the threat of police violence, especially for those that live in this parallel world? Very important points that were raised. Also, Dana talked about sort of the links, the concrete links between, when thinking about policing, between the recruiting of veterans and the potential for Islamophobia. and how that might also be sort of part of the larger sort of question around sort of police violence, harassment at a daily level in really all over the U.S. This connection between veterans and policing, and the larger arc of militarization of the police that we're all familiar with. Vivian talked a lot about the question of responsibility and how does one sort of bear witness to these things, especially when you are doing it through social media, but you're there, and the question of who you are and your relation to all these things, again, especially if police violence and the threat of it is not a part of your daily sensorial experience, then it's social media. And so what does that mean to be what kind of witness and what kind of work can you do in that context? And then finally, Beverly really closed it up so nicely by really reminding us that there are just so many examples of alternatives to conflict resolution and community building that are there to be drawn upon, that need to be taken seriously. Indigenous approaches, just neighborhood level approaches, even one might add. But that there's a whole world out there of things that we need to unpack and think about in terms of alternatives that hopefully that can be added to the larger demand for defund and abolish.
Thank you, Talia.
I can go next. Hello, assalamu alaikum. My name is Mona, and I didn't get permission from my group, so I won't share their names. But we had a great discussion, and I think there were 3 high-level points that I can summarize. One around systems of oppression and components of maybe white supremacy that we've sort of internalized into our own culture, and ultimately change management. Like, what do we actually do? And so starting with the first point around systems of oppression, they perpetuate trauma, and ultimately, like, we have this sort of simplified way of thinking where it's like us against them, which doesn't really set the stage for problem solving or thinking outside the box, which then, like, if we think about some aspects of white supremacy around like perfectionism or how to, you know, being objective in the face of problems, right? Like, how do you actually think through things? And if we look at our own culture, like if we talk about masjid culture and like how we're so focused on judgment, right? And who do we give compassion to, and who do we give judgment to? And we talked a little bit about like what happens when like a white guest comes to the masjid, and like how do we treat them, and like how have we internalized certain things. And then ultimately, if we think about change management, and okay, we're looking at these systems that are built, there's a lot of you know, resistance to driving change. How do you actually do that? And how do you, if a system needs to be completely dismantled and rebuilt, how do you do that? If the plane is flying, how do you break it and rebuild it while you're in midair? And what does that actually mean? And how we don't have to get it perfect, but we start and we learn and we redo until we get it where we need to be, and just starting somewhere, and knowing that we'll have challenges along the way, but we just figure it out. And then once we figure it out, then you scale it. And so I think those are sort of the three high level things that we talked about. And of course, there was lots of other great discussion too.
I can share next. So in our group, one person talked about how they moved from Chicago to Austin, which was a much more suburban place to live. And, you know, where in Chicago, it felt entirely like a police state, and just that felt like the way the world was. But that even in Austin, when they, you know, this person is Black, and even in Austin, when they were pulled over, and it was 6 months after Sandra Bland, it was a reminder that things can change and escalate very quickly, even in a place like Austin, and that they could see it in the interaction with the police officer as well. And they were just, reflecting on that, and how this is, it's not about a particular place or a particular neighborhood, though it is, but that it's also system-wide, and that abolition is really about deconstructing the system and reconstructing the world we live in to actually serve the people. So that was one really powerful thing to think about and reflect on, and just to imagine living in a world where you live with the benefit of the doubt. So that was part of it. And then another part of the discussion was thinking about the relationship between immigrant communities here and police, and thinking about how many of our families or communities bought into assimilation and the model minority myth, and really thinking about the psychology behind that and what brought us to that point, and to seek out, like, let's make sure we go to this good school instead of being in this neighborhood, and that we can either purchase or behave our way into protection, and just noting that over the years, it's become more and more apparent that it was all a myth, and that we had to sacrifice parts of ourselves and our identities in order to try and strive for that. And even then, we're not protected. Also looking at what it is like to come from Iran and live in a police state where, you aren't safe walking down the street, and you have, forces there literally silencing you. And then here, when immigrant communities then move to silence ourselves, right? And sort of being in a more automated police state, I suppose, in some ways. So that was a big part of it. And then also just really thinking about the legacy of Black communities in this country, and all they have done to make it to where immigrant communities actually have some of the privileges that they do, right? And thinking about how much there is to learn from that, and how a lot of what we're able to do today to fight for justice, as difficult as it is really built upon the shoulders of generations and generations of Black activists who have been challenging the status quo for so long. And so really reflecting on how we can move together in reflection of that, rather than feeling like we need to be in competition to protect ourselves, and rather move to a justice that centers us, and centers that. So that was basically it, but a lot of good discussion.
Thank you, Tanya.
I can report on mine. Just a sec, I took notes. So we had a question in our group, and we talked about police accountability, and what neighborhoods does that need to be looked at, and how do we start enabling how do we start making that happen? We live in neighborhoods that are not policed, like Hyde Park. What do we do in our neighborhood? What do we do on the east side? Or, I'm just using Austin as an example. Not everybody was from there, but everybody was from Austin in my group. So we decided that it's not one or the other, that it's all of the police force. So it's not just our neighborhood cops. It's the cops that are going on the east side who, don't get to work in our neighborhood where nothing happens. And so we have to use our privilege to make that happen. And we need to defund the police because they're getting all this government money because the government doesn't want to deal with any of the issues that they're making the police deal with, like homelessness. It's way out of their league. And so why are we paying that? Shouldn't we be helping the homeless? So it calls into question, what is our government doing and who is it serving and what is going on? Because if you're dispatching these police and paying them all this money to deal with all your issues, where are we at? So, and then, we talked about the Camden police force, where they closed their police force and they made everybody reapply to a public public force, some kind of, public safety force, and they re-interviewed people and a lot of people didn't apply. So that's an example of somebody that's trying to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it.
Thank you so much, Jody, and to all the groups for their reflections on the breakout spaces and for those who were able to share out. Right now, we are approaching the end of our time really, really rapidly. We may go a couple minutes over 1 p.m. So if you guys need to hop out at 1 p.m., I totally understand. Before we close out, we're going to have a grounding. And before that, I want to invite our panelists to share like less than 1 minute, a sort of summary or final reflections, if you're able to. If you have nothing to share, that's fine too, because we are short on time.
I'll say quickly that a lot of the conversation I've been hearing, fantastic conversation, circles around this dichotomy between individual and systemic and structural. And the way I think we need to think about policing is not whether or not individual police officers are bad apples or good, but whether the system and the structure itself serves the people, as one of the participants just said very nicely.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Hopkins.
And adding to that, what we talked about a little bit in our breakout, some of the panelists, is to get into that structural and institutional. Sometimes folks you talk to, if they're not meeting it at that level, try to get at the level of just, can you have empathy for others who are living the police state experience, not just in Kashmir, not just in Palestine, but that there are Kashmirs and Palestines right here in the US of A, and can you understand people living in that experience here? And yes, it's awareness, but what's particularly going on now, we didn't have in '79 when Grill Couch was chokehold, or in Evans Akie case in Austin, or some of the other cases. Those little cameras, and people being bold enough and brave enough to video and to document it and then to share it out so that people can see for themselves with their own eyes, the people who are living that police state experience right here. And then you have to ask yourself, are you going to accept this system functioning this way in your name? Does it represent your values, your morality, your sense of humanity? If not, then you got to join with us. You got to come out and you got to fight it.
Chills, Dr. Shabazz. Thank you so much. Would any of our other panelists like to share really, really brief reflections? All right, it's totally okay. If not, Pierce, could you bring up our PowerPoint? Thank you. So we've talked about a lot of really heavy stuff. I'm sure a lot of emotions, difficulties, all of that came up in your breakout spaces. A lot of complexities came up too. And I want to make sure that we're holding space for that. Before I move into the grounding, I just want to say, bravo and blessings to all our panelists, to all our participants. Thank you so much for holding space with us. Y'all are amazing, and we're so grateful to have you here. And as we move into our grounding, you're welcome to turn off mics and things if you want to, cameras if you would like to. And I want to invite you to gently find your breath again, to deepen your breath. See where you feel it the most, in your nose as the air rushes past, in your throat, in the rising and falling of your stomach. And I want you to allow your breaths to gently become a little bit deeper. And I want you to take a moment to thank yourselves for being in the space, for sharing vulnerability in this space, for reflecting on your experiences in a way that allowed you to grow in this space, hopefully. I also want to take a moment to recognize, to recall, to remember, and to respect our ancestors, our families, our fellow humans who are stuck and separated, perhaps behind borders, behind walls and policies. I want to take a moment to recognize, recall, remember, and respect those who were enslaved or are enslaved, those who have been robbed of their heritages, their cultures, their communities, languages, and traditions, cut off from their ancestral homes, those who are impacted by state violence in this room and out of this room, those who are not with us in this room, those who are with us in this room. I'd like to recognize, recall, remember, and respect ourselves for this space and the impact that this has on us. I want to honor, respect, and hold space for that trauma and that impact. I want to invite you to honor, respect, and hold space for that trauma and that impact on you and your communities. And I want to take this moment to center and ground ourselves in this room with each other, in this solidarity and support for one another that I hope you were able to experience today. The systems that oppress and marginalize us are deeply tied to each other, have deep roots, and have been taking place for centuries. The work that it took to establish these systems was intergenerational. And the work that it takes to undo these systems will be intercommunal, intergenerational, and will take place over the course of decades and centuries. I want us to ground ourselves in that work, that we are in a lineage of this work, in a tradition of this work. And I really want to thank you all for sharing this space with us today. As I pass it on to talk about our next steps, please invite yourselves back into the space.
Obaid will close us out with next steps, but before he does, I did want to quickly voice, we will be sharing any of the links that any of the panelists talked about and in a follow-up email. And before we walk through these other next steps, if you could quickly chat in how you heard about this event, that will help us as we continue to advertise for future events.
Can I just take one moment and also acknowledge, I think Ramesh probably pointed this out, but I just want to double point it out that we are standing on the shoulders as far as this race analysis and applying it to our own communities on hundreds of years of work that has been done by Black thinkers, revolutionaries, and in my eyes, prophets in this country. And we thank them.
Thank you so much for that. Obaid?
Excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Madaninejad, for that. Thank you. I was looking for that. So the next steps that you can take after joining us today. It was an honor to be in the presence of so many great minds, our panelists and our participants included. So we have more projects that you can involve yourself in. We'll continue our town hall sessions. Follow our Facebook, our Instagram, and our Twitter. I'll put it in the chat so you can link to it to keep up with our future discussions. In addition, we have a full season of an amazing podcast called The Defining Moments. This was my first interaction with I-AMM as an organization. It's changed my life, it will change your life. It's changed many people's lives. It's available on Apple Podcasts, or you can go to our website at I-AMM.org and keep updated. Thank you.
Thank you all. Hope to join you again in future events. Keep up with us, putting lots of love out there. Hope to see you all again. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, salam, khudafiz, namaste, whatever greeting outro y'all need.
Masalama.
Masalama.
Thank you all.
Bye.